Hello again. Welcome back once again. It is chess time. This video is going to cover more ground. I'm going to try to talk less, keeping the video within the half hour, but it might go over. I know I have a couple here that went into 40 minutes or so. But if you look on your right side of the screen, and if you are watching this in high definition, which actually you should be doing, we just covered opening principles, and in that video, at the end, I showed you what we're going to cover next is the pawn structure. It turns out that pawn structure and the rest are actually very short in comparison to the other parts that I had given you. So we're going to actually do 3 of these, and we're going to leave the art of the trade for later. So these 3 might go into more than a half hour, but I promise that I'll try not to talk so much and make it less boring for you. So without further ado, here we go. And you're going to recognize this from the last part of part 7. So here you go. Part 8, pawn structures.
Many of our strategic decisions in chess come from the nuances of pawn structure. While the least valuable piece individually, the pawn is arguably the most important element of evaluating chess positions, because structure is what gives dynamic potential to all the other pieces. I'll begin by teaching some of the pros and cons of various pawn formations, and then we'll see how they can be applied to strategic thinking. In this position, black's f-pawns are doubled. The f6 and f7 pawns are on the same rank. That's called doubled pawns. If this were a middle game position, and black were castled kingside, then the doubled pawns would be a hazard to king safety, because of the open g-file and weak h6 square. In an endgame, white might be able to slip in and attack the unsupportable h-pawn. If the f6 pawn, on the other hand, were on g7, there'd be no way for white to penetrate. One way of forcing this type of structural weakness in your opponent's position can be seen here. Take a look.
Okay, I don't think I'm supposed to move here. Let me just see. Yeah, he wants me to click next. So let's take a look at this. Do you see a way of forcing black to double a pawn? Okay.
It's white to move here. Do you see a way to force the weakening of black's pawn structure?
I think I just said that. Well, we can't just take right away because there's also a queen here. But how about...
Excellent work. Here, the bishop on g5 pins the knight on f6. You can attack the pinned piece with knight d5. There's no way for black to prevent knight takes f6, g takes f6, after which the king will be a little less safe and the f-pawn's doubled. Let's say after knight d5, black plays the interesting move, knight a5. White's bishop on c4 is pretty active, and so black chooses to trade knight for bishop. A good idea. Notice that the bishop can't escape, because after bishop b5, then black can play c6 and cause problem. The bishop for knight trade is going to happen. White just has to decide how. A key principle with pawns is to take towards the center. We always want to improve the cohesiveness of our pawns and to increase central control. After knight a5, white has a tough decision. What would you play?
Okay. I just want to make a quick note. A few seconds ago, he just showed you that I can't play this because he can fork me. Remember the forks? Okay. So, this is what we're going to play.
Good job. The best move is bishop b3. After black plays knight takes b3, what should you play?
Towards the center.
The best move is a takes b3, taking towards the center. Good job. Notice also now white's rook is opened up along the a file, and white's central control is strong. This particular example of doubled pawns, the b2 and b3 pawns for white, is not much of a weakness. Now, on the other hand, if white had played c takes b3, things would be different. Suddenly the d4 square is wide open. It's a big weakness. It's an outpost for black pieces. It can't be defended by a white pawn. Going back, if white had, say, castled here, and allowed knight takes c4, d takes c4, he also would have been forced to take away from the center. So in this position, white had to decide how to trade bishop for knight without losing central control and without weakening the pawn structure. So bishop b3, knight takes b3, a takes b3, recaptured towards the center, and white has a good game.
Okay.
Also notice that in this position, after white makes the inevitable trade on f6, knight takes f6, g takes f6, bishop h6. While both white and black have doubled pawns, white's position is much better, because black's doubled pawns weaken his king, and white's doubled pawns weaken nothing. Let's return to a position we saw not so long ago. We saw that black had doubled pawns. Black also has what's called isolated pawns. Isolated pawns are pawns that are exposed on open files and cannot be supported by other pawns. Here we see that black's c and h pawns are isolated. You can imagine that if white were to have two rooks on the c file or h file, this could cause big problems for black. On the other hand, if that a7 pawn were on b7 and white were to have a rook on c1, then simply c7 to c6 would put up a wall. Isolated pawns also have the downside of leaving open holes within their own camp, in which enemy pieces can comfortably lodge. We'll see more on this idea on the weak squares creating outpost section to come. Take a look at the next position. This is a typical position where black has an isolated pawn. You can see that white has the powerful d4 outpost for his knight or other pieces, and that the d5 pawn is a long-term weakness for black to deal with. Usually, when you have this type of isolated central pawn, when there are lots of pieces on the board, your best bet is to play very actively. Now let's return to that familiar pawn structure. We saw that black had double pawns and isolated pawns. There's one more weakness: pawn islands. A pawn island is a pawn or a group of pawns that has one or more files separating it from any other friendly pawns. In this position we see that white has 2 pawn islands and black has 4 pawn islands. This is a big difference, and it means that white's pawns will be more coordinated and have less holes in their structure as the game progresses. A trick that you can use when evaluating pawn structures, especially in or near the endgame, is to ask yourself how many pawn islands each player has. In general, the more pawn islands, the more weaknesses. Another key indicator of whether or not a pawn structure has the potential to be well coordinated is to check out whether they can create a pawn chain. Here we see the f2, e3, d4 pawns forming a chain, but there are much more powerful examples. Take a look at this. Who do you think is better here, white or black?
Well, that's an easy question to answer. I'll give you a second to look.
That's right. Here the material is even, but white has a huge advantage because of his pawn structure. First of all, he has 1 pawn island to 4. Black has doubled isolated h-pawns, which are useless and very vulnerable to attack. But perhaps the most impressive element of the position is white's huge pawn chain, stretching from g2 all the way to c6. A critical thing to realize in this type of situation is that white has only one potential weakness, the g2 pawn. Black has to try to attack the base of the pawn chain, but in this position g2 is comfortably defended by the white king. In contrast, black has weaknesses all over the board. And there's another key factor. White has a protected passed pawn. A passed pawn is one that has no enemy pawns blocking its path to promotion. Passed pawns are very important. My first teacher used to always tell me, passed pawns must be pushed. The further up the board a passer gets, the closer to promotion, and thus the more valuable it becomes. Often in endgames, and you can see this in my endgame course later on in the academy, the position hinges on whose pawns have more potential to be promoted. In this case, both white and black have passed pawns. The main difference is that white's passed pawn is further advanced and protected, while black's passed pawn still sits on its original square and is vulnerable to attack. Passed pawns are good, and protected passed pawns are even better. Here's another factor that should help you evaluate passed pawns in endgames. Whose is further away from the action? Take a look at this position. Here, both sides have passed pawns, but who do you think is winning, white or black?
Once again, I'll give you a second to look. Excuse me. But I think you know now that white is better.
Good job. It turns out that despite the material equality, white is completely winning because he has the outside passed pawn. If black plays king d5, white plays a4. Black has no choice but to stop the promotion. King c4. The king has to leave the king side, and now white can play actively with his king. king e4. Next he can play king takes e5, followed by king f6 to g7, takes on h7, takes on g6, and then he'll make a queen with the h-pawn, or g-pawn. White can gobble up all black's kingside pawns while the black king is preoccupied on the other side of the board.
Okay, one more page.
Returning to the last position. It's true, you could argue that black has the outside passed pawn, but in this case it doesn't really matter because the rook is such a powerful long-distance operator, and other factors are in this case more important. For example, the powerful pawn chain, black's many weaknesses, black's doubled pawns. White has a great game here. In chess, we're often weighing the values of different types of principles in order to properly evaluate a position. You'll get better at this as you gain experience and get used to working with the fundamentals. In time, all the principles I'm teaching you in this course will become part of your chess intuition. You'll think with them without even knowing it. For now, let's look at some of the impact of pawn structure on strategy.
I think that's it for the pawn structure. As you can see, what was that, maybe 10 minutes, and I was even doing a little bit of talking. So I hope by now you realize that this is taking you far into really learning how to play chess, not just how pieces move, but this is really taking us into pawn structure and stuff like that is an extreme importance into becoming a really good chess player. In fact, doing this particular part of this video, I went over this and I actually learned quite a bit. So let's continue and see how further we can get without taking more than a half hour.
Okay, now let's take a look at how pawn structure determines whether the game is an open game or a closed game, and then we'll see how that affects your pieces. First of all, an open game is when the central pawn structure is airy, ripe with possibility, and not locked down. Like in this position, this is an open game. Diagonals and files are not blocked, and pieces have tremendous dynamic potential. A general rule with many exceptions is that bishops are a little stronger than knights in open games, while knights sometimes have an edge in locked down pawn structures, in which time is not of the essence and their unique ability to leap over pieces becomes especially handy.
So this is where I didn't realize, and I guess I should have realized it, but I didn't realize the significance of an open and closed game and the significance that has a bearing on as far as, if you remember some of my first videos talking about the piece values, where bishops and knights are generally worth the same 3 points, but one is worth more than the other, and I attributed more value slightly to the knight because of its unique ability to jump. However, as Josh is pointing out here, in an open game like this, bishops can be actually more useful than a knight, and vice versa in a closed. So let me just go ahead and continue that.
Along those lines, what is black's best move here?
What is black's best move? Let's flip the board. Okay, so this is an open game. So maybe we want to trade one of our knights for a bishop. Okay, I forgot. I only did this once, so let's see. If I make a mistake, don't kill me. Here we go. Let's try this.
Well, we know we have an open game,
Good.
so knight b4 is very strong. The white bishop cannot escape the trade, and so black will have improved his position by eliminating a bishop in an open game. Without understanding how pawn structure affects the power of pieces, we would never have known where to look for the best move in this type of position. We work from our principles. Good job. Now, let's take a look at a closed game. This is a closed game because the central pawn structure is completely locked down. There is, however, a lot of play in the position. The B and H files are open, which means there is potential for both kingside and queenside attacks for either side. Remember how I said that sometimes knights are better in closed games? It's white's move here. What would you play?
Okay, so knights are better in closed games.
That's right. Here white can play bishop b5, pinning the knight on d7 to the rook. After rook d8, bishop takes d7, rook takes d7, let's evaluate the position. The only material difference is that black has a bishop for white's knight. Which do you prefer? How do you feel about that bishop? It turns out that white's position is better, because the game is closed and black's bishop is locked in by its own pawns. If it were a light-squared bishop, say on a6, then the evaluation would look quite different. Pawn structure is the crucial determinant of the strength and weakness of bishops.
Okay, I thought he covered that earlier, but apparently it's coming next, I hope.
Here are some principles that can guide your evaluations. First of all, bishops prefer open games to closed games. Also, a bishop is good if its fixed or immobile pawns are on the opposite color, so they don't block its moves.
And here it is.
And the opponent's fixed pawns are on the same color, providing targets. You want a bishop to have targets, not to be hemmed in by its own teammates. Take a look at this position.
Okay, so that was I thought it was earlier, but in other words, in the earlier position where he asked me what move would I make, you might have noticed that I don't know if you can remember, or maybe rewind the video a little bit, that I actually had a bad bishop because my own pieces were on the same, my own pawns were on the same color as my bishop. So moving my bishop to trade was basically trading my bad bishop for his good knight. Good night. Okay, so let's take a look at this position. Okay.
With what you now know about bishops, who's better here, white or black?
Okay, so after what we just talked about, the pawns, black has all his pawns on the same color as his bishop. Kind of, even though there's not that many pawns there, locking him down a little bit. Whereas I have mine on my opposite color, and his pawns are a target for me.
That's right. White is better, because black has all the weaknesses and white has all the targets. A subtlety about this principle, which is a distinction that is slightly more advanced in this course, but I'll tell you anyway, is that in the middle game or opening, you should focus on central pawns that are fixed when evaluating bishops, while in the end game you should focus on all pawns. This is an idea to keep in the back of your mind for a few years down the road.
Okay.
Who is better here, white or black?
Okay, I'll give you a few seconds to look at this. I'll highlight some of the squares with my mouse. Okay, long enough.
Good job. Black is better, because he has the good bishop. All white's pawns are on dark squares, locking in his bishop. And black has tons of targets. White has none. It's black to move here. What's your best move?
Okay, black to move. What shall I do? Is there any way to trade off my bad bishop? Well, this may be wrong, but I'm going to try it.
That's not the best move.
Okay. So, what is the best move? I'll give it one more shot so I don't take too much time, and then we'll say no. And let Josh Waitzkins answer the question. Ah, I didn't see this. Queen's right there. So I'm going to trade off my bad bishop for his good one. Yeah, that was a dumb thing I did before. Here it is. My queen is right there, so I'm offering him a queen. I'm offering him a bishop. I'm actually offering a trade. So because this is a bad bishop and his is a good bishop, I want to get rid of my bad bishop.
Bishop g4, an excellent strategical decision, trading your bad bishop for white's good bishop, and black takes the edge. So remember, when comparing bishops and knights, bishops are usually a little better in open games, and knights are usually a little better in closed games. And when comparing bishops with other bishops, a good bishop is one that has lots of targets. If you have a light squared bishop, you want your pawns for the most part to be on dark squares, not getting in the way, and you want your opponent's pawns to be on the same color as your bishop. Understanding what makes a bishop good is critical in knowing what and when to trade.
Okay, I believe that was the last part I was going to show you for this particular video. Of course, I'm going to show you the next topic as a beginner. As a beginning. Like I've been doing in the last few videos, give you a taste of what's coming. But again, I hope you realize that it's now getting to the point where I'm showing you is a lot more than just showing you how pieces move and telling you how many squares there are and things like that. This is actually going to take you into playing a strong game. And again, I'm learning with you. I'm actually, since I've been doing this video thing with Chess Masters Academy, my game has improved. I don't know if you can measure it or not, but I did notice an improvement in my game, even if it's only slight. I've been playing for years, so it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, but I am doing it. Of course, I don't only have Chessmaster to thank for that. If you go to my channel, you'll see that I also linked some recommended channels. There's the St. Louis Chess Club channel, which I highly recommend. They have Grandmaster lectures. They got kids classes, and they got all kinds of stuff, but they're putting these free videos up, and I'm learning from there too. So in any case, it's probably going on that half hour or so. I haven't really been timing it, so I'm going to leave it at that. But before I actually leave, I'm going to go to the next topic and show you a taste of what's to come.
Okay, now let's take a look at how pawn structure determines weak squares, and we'll learn how to create outposts for our pieces. It's key to notice squares in or near the enemy camp that can be supported by one or more of your pawns but cannot be defended by your opponent's pawns. If you can occupy that square with a piece that is less valuable than any of your opponent's pieces that can capture it, this can lead to a huge strategic advantage.
Okay, so I hope that this is helping all of you, and if any of you want to subscribe, that would be great. Show your friends the videos. Maybe they could subscribe. Review the videos. I hope you're actually getting better at your game. So keep on playing.